Edit audio.
We pulled up in the driveway. We knocked on the door. Nobody came, and I knocked again. And I thought, well, the kids said the door was unlocked. So I opened the door and I hollered and said, hello, hello. And nobody came. And I said, Stacy. And I called for Suzie. And I thought, well, I'm going to go on in. I've got to find her.
It was on June 7th of 1992 when 3 women went missing from a single-family home in the Missouri Ozarks. Stacy, McCall, and Suzie Streeter, who along with Suzie's mother, Sherrill Levitt, completely vanished in the early hours of the girls' graduation night, and they've been missing ever since. There have been no traces of a body, and there is no DNA. There was no noise or disturbance. The only thing that was even slightly amiss was a broken porch light. So what exactly happened that night? How could 3 women go to sleep and then suddenly vanish? We're hoping to find out.
I think they're seen by somebody. I think you've got 2 teenage girls driving little red cars. I think at some point somebody sees that and follows them to the home.
Like, this is something that at this point I'd only ever seen on TV, and I never really thought about ever, like, nothing like that could ever happen in my life. Like, things like that don't happen in Springfield, Missouri. Your best friend doesn't just disappear.
I wish they would, whoever took them would let us know. I don't care how they let us know. They can write a letter or somehow send something and really just let us know where they are. If they're alive, if they're buried, if they're, whatever happened.
This is the story of the Springfield 3, and I'm your host, Anne Roderique-Jones. This story is a compelling and chilling mystery set in the Missouri Ozarks. And this podcast will follow the lives of Stacy, McCall, Suzie Streeter, and Suzie's mother, Sherrill Levitt, 3 beautiful blonde women who vanished from a tight-knit community in southern Missouri. There are still tattered missing posters that can be found around town, where locals believe that the 3 women who vanished over 28 years ago might still be somewhere deep in the Ozark woodlands, and some believe they're still alive. But this is not just a crime. It's a story of 3 women that forever changed a small Missouri town and the people that live in it.
Immediately after it happened, the entire narrative of the city changed, and we did think in the beginning that they were going to be found. I mean, it's still baffling.
We had no idea that something like this could happen in our community. So nobody's mind went to the worst case scenario, because things like that just don't happen in Springfield.
The idea of 3 people being kidnapped from one location I couldn't find a case in the Department of Justice files of anything like that had occurred up to 1992. So it was indeed an extraordinary crime.
So before we get into this, you may be thinking, why now? Why is this story important to me? Well, I'm a longtime writer, editor, and journalist with a background in magazines, but I'm also from Springfield, Missouri, and I vividly remember this disappearance. I was 12 years old when Stacy, Suzie, and Sherrill disappeared. I want to pull back the curtain and tell you how this podcast came about and why I'm doing this whole thing. I'm from Springfield, Missouri. I was born there at Cox North Hospital, and my family has lived in the area for generations. Springfield is located in the southwest part of Missouri. It's about an hour from the border of Arkansas in a region known as the Ozark Mountains. The Ozarks are a bit of a curiosity. This oft-forgotten pocket of America straddles the southern region of Missouri and northern territory of Arkansas. It even dips a smidge into southern Illinois, Oklahoma, and southeastern Kansas. This swath of land that's the Ozark Mountains is densely forested territory that covers nearly 50,000 square miles. It's where imposing limestone bluffs tower high above the crisscross trails and streams. These are the hamlets that moonshiners once called home. And this was my playground as a child. My friends and I rode our bikes everywhere, and we went alone. My dad lived in Hollister, Missouri, then just a speck of a town. His house butted up against Table Rock Lake and miles of woods. My siblings and I would spend dawn to dusk among the forest. Sometimes we'd get lost, but we always found our way back home. Here's my husband, Nate, who grew up just outside of Springfield in a house on 40 acres of forested land.
I am Nate Jones, and I was born and raised in Springfield, Missouri. I grew up with a lot of woods and forest around me. So when I was growing up, there was a lot of playing there. But you could just wander around, and there was a creek where our family lived. We'd play in that. We could go wherever we wanted. We would go all over the place out in the middle of the woods. There was really nothing to happen.
You may have even heard about the Ozarks, especially in recent years. Maybe you've seen the movie Winter's Bone, a 2010 film that was adapted from Daniel Woodrell's book of the same name. The film stars Jennifer Lawrence as a teenage girl in the rural Ozarks of Missouri who, to protect her family from eviction, must locate her missing father. This movie was filmed in the Ozarks, and some of it was even shot in Springfield. There's also the most recent season of HBO's True Detective with Mahershala Ali. It's set in the Arkansas Ozarks, and it follows a gruesome murder to Devil's Den State Park, a hauntingly beautiful park with rock dams of blue-green waters and deep caverns that you could easily get lost in. I actually interviewed the production designer for True Detective, Ryan Warren Smith, and he told me that filming elsewhere wasn't even an option. He said, "There's no faking this area. Once we went there, we fought for it." He also said that they used nature as a backdrop, often shooting at locations that register as creepy but beautiful. There's a common narrative to these shows and movies. All of them revolve around a disturbing reality of corruption and murder in the dense woods of America's Ozarks. And then, of course, there's the show titled Ozark, with Laura Linney and Jason Bateman. I'm not going to give away any of the major plot lines, but after a money laundering scheme goes wrong, the family becomes entangled with local criminals. This show was actually filmed in Georgia, but it feels eerily familiar to me. There's the big lake and the wooded hollows. There's a narrative that follows the rich and the very poor. And there's a storyline that includes the deeply religious. Springfield is in the heart of the Bible Belt, and it's most definitely a church-going town, mainly of Christian faith and dominated by megachurches. My family even owned a Christian bookstore that sold Bibles and religious music and gifts. James River Assembly of God, the largest Assembly of God church in the United States, is actually located in Springfield. I've been to this church a handful of times. It's a place where people talk in tongues, they don't drink alcohol, and regular tithe is deducted from their bank accounts. The church's new palatial location is actually just down the street from my in-laws' lovely community in Ozark, Missouri. So who makes up this town? Aside from the religious, the wildlife aficionados, and folks like the McCalls and the Streeters. According to a U.S. Census, Springfield, Missouri is 85% white alone, less than 5% Hispanic or Latino, and under 5% Black or African American. The poverty rate in the U.S. usually hovers around 10%. In Springfield, Missouri, the poverty rate is 25%. That's 1 in every 4 people. Springfield is one of the 3 largest cities in the area, but when I was growing up, it felt like a small town, especially in 1992. Our neighbors looked out for each other, and the degree of separation there was small. It was likely that I'd always see someone I knew at a gas station, grocery store, or the mall. Springfield is also an affordable part of the country to buy a home, and my family, and a lot of others, would say that it's a good place to raise children. I want to paint this picture for you to let you know that most families in Springfield felt safe. Most didn't have alarm systems or even lock their doors. But in 1992, this crime shook the town, and everything changed.
Police are working extended shifts around the clock trying to find Sherrill Levitt, her daughter Suzanne Streeter, and Suzanne's best friend Stacy McCall. The 3 disappeared from this house early Sunday morning.
That summer of 1992, my sleepy town of Springfield, Missouri became the news peg of an unsolved disappearance. All of these bulletins that were normally stacked with church socials or used car ads were replaced with thousands of these bright yellow missing person flyers. They implored everyone to help bring Sherrill Levitt, Suzie Streeter, and Stacy McCall home. It wasn't only the law enforcement who worked tirelessly to solve this case, it was the entire town. When I set out to create this podcast, I flew to the Ozarks with our producer Allie to record interviews and gather information. I remember this case like it was yesterday, but did everyone? I've not lived in my hometown for years, and I was wondering if the impact of these women is still so prevalent today. Ellie and I stopped by a bar after a long and frankly a heartbreaking day of interviews. We chatted up a guy named Darren, and I'd envisioned him to be in his 50s. Did he remember the women?
Do you remember the posters with the women on it?
Yeah. You see that they have it all over. There was like the 3 pictures there, like in a row. Remember that? The mother, the daughter, the friend. It was just, it was everywhere. And you go places, you see it someplace, you'll see it. It's still up, but not so much for getting people to come in and give it information, just because of kind of like we call it posterity or whatever it was. Just kind of, this is a big deal that happened here back then.
A lot of people in Springfield refer to them as the 3 missing women, and they still do to this day. If I were to see one of them at this moment, I might recognize them. I didn't know Suzie, Stacy, or Sherrill, but it almost feels like I do. And to be totally honest, when talking about these women, I don't know if I should use past or present tense. You might hear me toggle between both, because we don't really know if they're here or gone. Stacy McCall was an 18-year-old senior at Kickapoo High School, the same school that my own mother graduated from in 1974 and Brad Pitt in 1982. Stacy would graduate 10 years later. She was beautiful, with dark blonde hair and sun-lightened ends that hung down the middle of her back. She had striking blue eyes, freckles on her face, and a dimple in the middle of her chin. She worked for Springfield Gymnastics and often modeled at a local bridal shop. Stacy looks like the homecoming queen, but I shouldn't be the one to tell you about her.
I'm Janice McCall, and it's Janis McCall, and I am Stacy McCall's mother.
I met with Janice McCall at a local library in town. Her health hasn't been that great in recent years, but she agreed to meet with me to do this interview. Her daughter has been missing for almost 30 years, and she's done countless interviews in hopes of finding her.
Stacy was, from the very beginning, an ornery little thing. She loved to do things and was always going fast, and she's always helping others. She really just ran and had fun. She always let us know where she was going. All the girls did, except on 1 or 2 times that I'm finding out about now, after she's been missing a long time. She tended to be kind of goofy. And Stacy was just Stacy. She said, I just want to go and have fun, Mom. And I said, okay, do it.
Heather Kohler grew up on Delmar, just down the street from where the women disappeared, and she took classes at Springfield Gymnastics, where Stacy worked at the time.
She was really pretty. She had this beautiful, beautiful hair. She had a really, really pretty smile. So I think that's why she always stood out to me and why I remember her so vividly. But yeah, she was just really warm and inviting, and she was just this like very all-American girl, really.
Suzie Streeter was 19 years old at the time of her disappearance. She's petite at just 5'2" and 102 pounds. She has bleached blonde, straight shoulder-length hair and big brown eyes. She had a narrow face, and there's a small tumor in the left corner of her mouth, which gives the appearance that she was sucking on a gumball or maybe even smirking a little bit. She was also a senior at Kickapoo High School and planned to follow in her mother's footsteps by going to cosmetology school after her graduation. Suzie looks like she'd be the cool girl in your school, the one that you want to be friends with, but you might be a little bit intimidated by. She was anything but. Nigel Holderby worked at the local movie theater with Suzie, and they quickly became best friends.
We worked in the box office together. She came in for an interview, and I was at the box office, and we chatted while she was waiting for her interview, and she got the job, and then it's one of those friendships that just blossomed from the minute that you meet someone. And so we became fast friends, and we got our manager to let us work our shifts together. And when we had to do concessions, we would convince him that he needed both of us in concessions so that we could work back in concessions. And so that's really where we met.
How would you describe her to other people?
She was just a happy person. Not to say that she didn't have those that under the surface, just really deep, life and history and hurts and all of those things that we carry with us, but always just very outgoing and bubbly. And she just really went out of her way to just be happy and friendly and approachable and pleasant. She was really good at her job, but good at being a good human.
Stacy and Suzie had known each other as kids, but had grown apart in their teenage years.
When Stacy was in grade school, in 2nd or 3rd grade, she met Suzie. And even though Suzie didn't live real close and they all went to the same grade school, she and Janelle and Suzie and several others all palled around. Now, in about 2nd or 3rd grade, 4th at the latest, she spent the night with Suzie. That was the only time I remember her spending the night. They did go over and swim and have fun. That wasn't anything major. So when we moved to Wichita and came back, Suzie had been with a different crowd. Stacy did not run around with her. She ran around with Janelle, and she ran around with her sisters a lot. But she and Suzie didn't really get together and spend much time until about 3 to 4 weeks before graduation.
Sherrill Levitt, Suzie Streeter's mother, was 47 years old at the time of her disappearance. She had a thin build and freckles on her neck and upper chest area. Like her daughter, Sherrill was short and petite, at 5 feet and just 110 pounds. And like her daughter, she had short bleach blonde hair that was naturally curly on top and shorter in the back. She also had big brown eyes. There was no question that the two were mother and daughter. Sherrill was from Seattle but had moved to Springfield to build a new and better life for herself and her daughter. She worked as a hairdresser at New Attitudes Hair Salon, and she had about 250 clients. That's a lot for a new person in town. The salon is actually still open today, and we'll revisit that in another episode. Sherrill was known to be a model employee, and yeah, she'd had some setbacks, but it really seemed like things were starting to look up. In 1992, Sherrill and Suzie moved into the small white house at 1717 East Delmar, a fresh start, if you will. Sherrill, Suzie, and her friend Stacy would disappear from this home just 2 months later. One more thing to note. Sherrill was a chain smoker, and this will be an important fact later. Nigel remembers being at their house a lot when she was younger.
I was at their house all the time. I pretty much became a regular. And her mom was just welcoming, like, love you, you're my kid now, like, you're part of this family. And, every night we would work late. The theater would close. The last showing wouldn't get out sometimes till 1, and then we clean. And so, we might be getting home at 2:00. And so there were nights when on the weekend, I would just go home with Suzie and we'd do stuff the next day or whatever. And so I would stay the night with her. And every night, that was like her standard habit. She would go in and she would just kiss her mom on the head. She would just whisper to her, "I'm home." But it wasn't a phone call. It wasn't her mom, they had a thing. And it was, you wake me up and let me know when you're home.
Now let's start from the beginning, a timeline, or at least some semblance of a timeline. Stacy and Suzie graduated from Kickapoo High School on June 6th of 1992. After the graduation, both girls planned to attend parties that night and continue celebrating by driving to Branson, Missouri and staying in a hotel about an hour away.
And she told us where all she was going to go, and she says, "We think we might be going on down to Branson because we're going to be at Whitewater tomorrow." And I said, "Okay, when are you going to drive to Branson?" And she said, after we graduate, after we get all dressed up and we change our clothes, and then we'll probably go. We're going to meet at Janelle's first.
I want you to go back to your graduation night. What did you do? Was it different from Stacy and Suzie's? I didn't go to the same high school as Stacy and Suzie, but in the Ozarks, a night of parties was pretty much what every kid in town was doing on graduation. The next morning after graduation day, the girls were planning to go to Whitewater. Whitewater is this water park in Branson that I often went to as a kid. It was a run-of-the-mill water park, but for kids from the Ozarks, it was a big deal. There was this large and almost dangerous wave pool, a handful of water slides, and a lazy river. And it was expensive, at least for my family, and always a special occasion, like something you'd do for graduation. So that's what was planned. But here's what happened instead. At 10:30 p.m. on June 6th, Stacy and McCall called her mother Janice to let her know that they were not planning to make the drive to Branson that night, and they'd just go the next morning instead. And here's where plans get a little fuzzy. The girls were originally going to sleep at their friend Brian Joy's house, but then at the last minute, they decided that they would instead go and stay at their friend Janelle Kirby's.
She called us about 10:30 that night and said, "We're not going to go to Branson tonight. We're going to wait till tomorrow. And I'm just going to stay here all night. And we're all going to stay on the floor after we get tired at Brian Joy's house." But I guess at the last minute, she decided, and all of them, Brian decided for him, that they should not be at his house, that they needed it all clean up, and then they should go on down to Janelle's.
So she called her mom and said they weren't going to Branson and were going to Janelle's instead. That might have been the plan, but after that call, Suzie and Stacy attended a few parties with their friends. And according to a police report, they went to a party at the Greason residence in Battlefield, Missouri, and then left at 2 a.m., driving just around the corner to Janelle's house. But that's not where they ended up. It turns out that Janelle had quite a bit of family in town for her graduation, and they were taking up extra beds. So Janelle's mother, Kathy, laid out a pallet in the living room for Suzie and Stacy. This is when their plans changed again. According to a police report, after 2 a.m., the girls told Kathy and Janelle that they would be more comfortable at Suzie's house. She had received a new waterbed for a graduation gift. They each drove their own cars to Suzie's and had planned for Janelle to call them in the morning to go to Whitewater. But that early morning conversation would be the last time the girls were ever to be seen. So what exactly was going on at Suzie's house, the one that she lived in with her mom, Sherrill? Here's what we know. Sherrill Levitt was last heard from at approximately 11:15 p.m. on that graduation night of June 6, 1992. She had telephoned a friend while painting a chest of drawers and gave no indication that anything was amiss inside her home. If Sherrill went to sleep before 2 a.m., did she even know that the girls had come home to sleep at her house? Did they pop in her room after being out partying and tell her that they were instead staying there? Did Suzie give her mom the whole "I'm home safely" kiss that Nigel mentioned? It appears as though Stacy and Suzie had arrived at the Delmar house. Their clothing, jewelry, and purses, and both of their vehicles were found at the location. We'll talk more in detail about this in another episode, but here's Rick Bookout. He was the first responding officer on the scene.
In my opinion, it looked like the girls had come home. They went into the bedroom, and it looked to me like everything was okay up to that point. I think things were normal when they got home. They went in, they were getting ready for bed. So whatever happened after that point.
So why did three women, two girls who often didn't even hang out that much and who completely changed their plans at the last minute, disappear on the same night without a trace and virtually no evidence? And why would anyone want to take these women, who were known to be kind, popular, and responsible? To make one person disappear would be difficult. To make three disappear is nearly impossible. Throughout this series, we're going to hear from a number of people, many who have theories about what could have happened to Stacy, Suzie, and Sherrill. We're going to hear about theories of corruption, about bodies being buried under a parking lot, about suspected grave robbers, and a haunted Girl Scout camp. This case is almost 30 years old, and we're still trying to figure all of this out. So I'm going to lay it out as simply as possible as we go along. For starters, one thing I'm trying to wrap my head around is this. When exactly did the perpetrator enter the house? Were they hiding in the home and waiting when the girls arrived at 2 a.m.? Did they follow Stacy and Suzie from the graduation parties? Or did they come for Sherrill and were surprised to find two young women in the house? Who would want to do this to these women? On the next episode of the Springfield 3.
Cheryl's keys, her car keys were laying there, and I thought, well, yeah, but her car's out there. But it was when I noticed her cigarettes and lighter. I thought, oh, now, a smoker will leave a lot of things, but they won't leave their cigarettes and lighter. So then I began to think, well, there may be something unusual going on here.
In episode 2, we'll dig into the morning after, when police arrived on the scene. But more importantly, we'll discover what friends and family saw when they arrived at the Delmar house that made them realize something was horribly wrong. The Springfield 3 is an Edit Audio original production created in collaboration with Anne Roderique-Jones. The series is written, researched, and hosted by Anne Roderique-Jones. It was produced and edited by Ali Sirwa, with executive producing from Steph Colburn, Sophie Shin, and with lots of help from the rest of the amazing Edit audio team. The archival news clips you heard in this episode are from KY3 News. Original scoring for this episode was written and produced by Patrick Grindle at Studio Dolly. Theme music was written by Patrick Grindle and Ali Sirwa and was produced by Patrick Grindle at Studio Dolly. And thank you to all of those who share their stories with us. This project would not be possible without you.